I requested them, and they approved, and they are here to share with us some amazing facts about the Niles. And if we have any questions, let's talk to them. Let's learn more about our building, the area nearby, and stuff. Thank you so much for coming, Mark.
Thank you.
And Barbara.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Let me get over here by my mouse. So again, as I was saying, I am an amateur genealogist, love history. I'm involved, I'm on the board of directors for the Niles Historical Society, and I'm a lifetime member there. I'm also a member at the Mount Prospect Historical Society, where I also volunteer as a docent, museum guide, and do research as requested by them. I've done it for both museums. While I've never lived in Niles, as was mentioned, I have very, very strong ties to Niles, including where this building is. This building actually is built on the site of my great-grandfather's house, farmhouse.
Oh, can you make it?
My great-grandfather, like I said, lived here. His brother, Theodore, and we'll get into more details of this, actually lived next door where the factory is. And we'll get more into that factory. Part of the reason this drum is here, compliments of the museum, is because it was made in that factory right next door. Slingerland Drum Company occupied that building, and they built and manufactured jazz drums, marching drums, multiple kinds of drums. So to talk about my family and this location, we kind of got to go.
Attention all staff, just a reminder, the exam room is now open for flu shots. Attention all staff, just a reminder, the exam room is open for flu shots.
Close the door.
Just to give you to talk about the history of this area, you kind of get into the history of the Niles area itself. Before 1803, Milwaukee Avenue along here was just an Indian trail. It was an Indian trail. It started just short of where Fort Dearborn was eventually established. But part of that was it was a great canoe location for the people coming up the Chicago River. That got to keep in mind the Chicago River flowed the other direction back before the city of Chicago reversed the river. So there was a lot of portage, a lot of traders, fur traders, and Indians that would travel along Milwaukee Avenue pre-1803. And part of that, if you look at the map of Chicago, and some of you are very familiar with Chicago, you'll note that Milwaukee Avenue doesn't follow Chicago's grid system. They're very grid-oriented. Streets go north, south, east, west. Well, Milwaukee Avenue goes northwest, and part of that is because of the fact that it was an Indian trail. It followed, as you can see in some of these maps and some of the other discussions, and from even in your own backyard, you have the north branch of the Chicago River right here. So that's why it kind of meandered, following along the, not, right up to the hip of the river, but within close proximity of the river, and followed that path northwest. In 1803, Fort Dearborn was established at the junction of the rivers in Chicago. And also one of the things that I wanted to mention when we were talking about portages, pre-1803, there was a very, very large Indian village right about where Irving Park and Milwaukee Avenues are right now. And part of that was the conjunction between the Milwaukee River and the Des Plaines River. It was an easy portage right there at where that village was set up. So, again, the Indian or Native Americans flourished quite a bit during this time, that time. Again, 1803, Fort Dearborn was established. It was destroyed in 1812, during the War of 1812. Some dang British people burned it. What can we say about those British? But the fort was rebuilt in 1816. The next this big significant date is 1829. I'm going to get the pronunciation murdered on this, but that's where the Treaty of Prairie du Chien
Perfect.
was signed. Part of that ceded a lot of Indian properties, Native American properties, to the European settlers, and established, for one thing, 3 Indian reservations: the Billy Caldwell Reservation, Jane Miranda Reservation, and the Victoria Pothier Reservation. And those are significant because the Victoria Pothier and the Jane Miranda Indian Reservation included this property. Actually, the Jane Pothier Reservation was where this property is. And those 2 reservations ended up becoming a part of Niles. The Billy Caldwell Reservation was south of here and is part of Chicago. But that's where we get Caldwell Woods, and the Caldwell Avenue is from the Billy Caldwell Reservation. 1834 is the first arrival of European settlers in the Niles area. There's a family called the Ebbingers. They came originally from Germany, but they first settled in Michigan. But they heard from there was different groups of that were in this area. Among them, there was a militia or an army garrison from Niles, Michigan, that was part of the French and Indian, or the Black Hawk War. I apologize, the Black Hawk War. And so they came back home and were talking about how fertile the land in northern Illinois was and whatnot. So the Ebbingers, it took them at least a week or 2 weeks to get from Michigan by horse drawn wagon to the Niles area. And they stopped here because they had to. They were following the Indian Trail that we know as Milwaukee Avenue, got to this area, actually within a mile of here, and their horse stepped on a rattlesnake and died. Got bit by the rattlesnake and died, and they're kind of like, well, I guess we're gonna set up our farm here. And that's what they did. So it's kind of, by accident, so to speak, that they settled here. Next, again, part of this, the history of this area is the history of Chicago. In 1834, a town gets formed called Chicago. Population 200 people in 1834. If you can imagine that we've only got 200 people in there. Within 7 years, so from 1834 to 1841, the population grew from 200 to more than 6,000 residents. So that gives you an idea of how much of a booming town Chicago was. 1837, the city of Chicago is incorporated. It officially becomes the city of Chicago, not the village of Chicago. Again, I gave you the example of the growth from 34 to 41. For several decades, it remained one of the fastest growing cities in America. In 1849, we begin what's called the Plank Road area. the Indian Trail, became a series of ruts. At one point, you could find, the Indian Trail or Milwaukee Avenue, 8 wagon ruts wide. Because, again, everybody's bouncing up and down, they're trying to find a smoother route, and so they go a little bit over and a little bit over, and eventually it gets to be eight ruts wide. What happened in 1849, they decided to pave the road. They call it a plank road. What they did is they put 2x4s down the center, and then about 8 feet on either side, they put 2x4s, and then they put 8-foot planks on either side, creating a paved road to try to, again, make it a little easier to get through. Of course, they also invented this thing. I'm sure it wasn't their invention, but they decided to put in toll roads or toll booths on Milwaukee Avenue. It was said that between in Chicago and Wheeling, the toll fees would include $1.30 to get you from Chicago to Wheeling, Illinois, in tolls, including a 35-cent toll here in Niles, which at that time was called Dutchman's Point. Also, due to different restrictions and problems in Chicago, one of Niles's biggest business ventures at the time were taverns, just over the city limit. So you have a string of taverns right there, and working class people would, obviously come up and spend their money in the taverns. Again, by the 1850s, new owners of the road came along, and again, the tolls that I'm talking about, they weren't like our tolls now, where it goes to the, state, and they're supposed to be used for road improvements. These are independent private people putting up toll booths because it's going through their land and charging people money to traverse it, and so they were making money. And by the late 1850s, portions of the plank road started being replaced with gravel roads, because again, if you think about it, the planks are, you've got those 2x4s running along. Well, some of them are going to sink, some are going to raise up, especially when it rains, they're going to sink a little more. So it wasn't the most stable of roads, our wonderful Milwaukee Avenue here. Next big event, again, because of the history of Niles being so tied in with Chicago, in 1871 there was the Great Chicago Fire. I'm sure you guys have all heard about the Great Chicago Fire. And how it affected Niles is people were fleeing the flames and traveling north, and a lot of them came up on Milwaukee Avenue to flee the flames, and they were stopping at farmhouses, taverns, whatever, looking for shelter, for water, for food, whatever they could to, again, because so much of their homes were destroyed in that fire, and the people of Niles helped them out. They didn't turn their back on the refugees from the city of Chicago. One of the other stories that I've read from a newspaper article is the blaze from the Great Chicago Fire was so bright that a farmer about a mile or two from here in Niles went out in his backyard, propped up a chair, opened up a newspaper, and could read the newspaper at night by the glow from the Chicago Fire. Wow. In his backyard.
Wow.
That gives you an idea of the intensity of that fire. So, in 1872, shortly, not relating to the Chicago Fire, but in 1872, St. Adalbert's Cemetery was established. It's right across the road from here. It was a Polish, Slavic cemetery, because a lot of the snobs in Chicago wouldn't let some of the Poles and Slavs be buried in their cemeteries. So they petitioned the church and said, we want to build our own. And hence St. Adalbert's was established here in Niles, like I said, across the road from here. One of the things that St. Adalbert's, the building of St. Adalbert's did was it increased the traffic from the city of Chicago to St. Adalbert's. You had funeral processions, weekends, you would have families coming to pay their respect to their families, traveling up Milwaukee Avenue to St. Adalbert's. You'll see on this map here, one of the main things that propped up across from that gate right there was taverns again. You know, people get thirsty, people get hungry after traveling. It would take about 3 to 4 hours, even on a plank road, traveling from Chicago to St. Adalbert's. And so you can imagine, you know, 3 or 4 hours, spend a couple hours at the cemetery, your throat's gonna be a little dry. So, you know, beer or two would probably hit the spot. Well, one of the other things about the taverns is families coming to St. Adalbert's, if it rained or it stormed, which, I'm sorry, does it ever rain in Chicago or have bad storms in Chicago?
Once in a while.
Yeah. So, again, Milwaukee Avenue would become impassable, and you'd have families that are at St. Adalbert's. What they would do is a lot of them would go across the street to the taverns and end up sleeping on the pool tables in the taverns for the night, just because of the fact that they couldn't get home, at that time. So that's kind of interesting. And then also some farmers, and that includes my relatives, which again we'll get into more detail about my relatives, would also do things like grow flowers and then put a flower stand on Milwaukee Avenue selling flowers for the people that are coming up to the cemetery. Now, one of the tough things was there's also been stories that I've come across where families or funeral processions are coming up Milwaukee Avenue to St. Adalbert's from Chicago. And again, because of the quality of the road and the unevenness of the road, they'd hit some potholes or bumps in the road, or planks that were loose, and they would bump so bad that the coffins sometimes fell out of the hearse.
Jeez.
Right in front of the family. You can imagine that was not a pleasant experience for the grieving families. This picture for 1889 is actually the Niles toll booth. It wasn't the last toll booth to be destroyed, but I included that picture there. The last toll booth was destroyed in 1889 by a group of concerned citizens, translated a mob, stormed the toll booth and burned it down. The owners, of course, were sent for the police, who basically came and sympathized with the mob and watched the toll booth burn down, and no arrests were made. So, and unfortunately, I wouldn't advocate doing that with any toll booths on the Illinois toll booths. I believe the police are less sympathetic at this time, and you might get arrested for that. And finally, in 1899, the village of Niles is formed and established. One of the things I mentioned previously was the area was called Dutchman's Point. prior to being called the Village of Niles. And there's a lot of different talk about, you know, the reasons why. Some people thought that because there was a lot of German families settling here, that you know, they thought they were speaking Dutch, and that's why they called it Dutchman's Point. I'm more on the side of because there was a lot of German families, Germany, and my aunt Helga, who's at the back there, can vouch for me. Germany in basically in German is Deutschland, and German is Deutsch. So kind of a, pardon the wording, but bastardization of Deutsch becomes Dutchman's point, and I kind of tend to lean towards that. Now we're going to get into my family's time. That's pretty much the history of the area with regard to, you know, Milwaukee Avenue and the forming of the village. My story ties into three gentlemen: Heinrich Rinker, Wilhelm Kolb, and Heinrich Thoms. Obviously, with my last name being Mark Thoms, Heinrich Thoms is how I got my last name. The first gentleman, Heinrich Thoms, was born in 1918 in Hebron, Germany. He got married in 1842. One of the things that, interesting things about Heinrich, or HW, as he was known, is that he came from a very prominent bell-making family in Germany. They made bells, they still make bells. The company is still in business in Germany making bells. But in 1846, HW goes to his father and says, "Dad, I don't want to make bells." You know, he was the eldest son. He was all set to inherit the company business. And he tells his dad, "I don't want to make bells. I want to be a Lutheran minister." Dad takes stock in what he says, promptly kicks him out, disowns him, and disinherits him.
Wow.
And so H.W. Rinker ends up arriving in 1846. Again, keep in mind the city was just recently formed when he arrives in 1846. Let's see, yeah, 1837 is when the city of Chicago was incorporated. So he's here 9 years after the city was incorporated. Arrives here with his wife and a couple of kids. I mentioned one son, with 50 cents to his name. Not a lot of money, even back then, to support a family. Luckily enough, HW runs into an old man who owned a metal casting company. He was looking for somebody to take over the business so he could retire. H.W. Rinker says, "Well, I know a little bit about casting, you know, coming from a bell casting family." And they make an agreement. H.W. Rinker ends up taking over the casting company, provides for his family, and actually becomes quite a wealthy man by making bells. In 1848, 2 years after he arrives in Chicago, he cast the bell for St. Peter's Church, which at that time was considered the largest bell in the city of Chicago.
Wow.
So, you know, he had some talent.
Is it still there, or?
I'm not sure. I haven't been able to establish that. And here's an advertisement from his casting company. Church bells, steamboat, and handbells of all sizes. This was taken out of the Chicago Tribune. Also, soda fountains, beer pumps, oil globes, stopcocks, and cash paid for old brass, copper, and pewter. So that's H.W. Rinker, and if you notice, the address was 198 Randolph Street. So that property is probably definitely not a foundry at this point. So-
Was the St. Patrick's Church, the old St. Pat's that's down there now?
Not St. Pat's, it's St. Peter's.
Oh, St. Peter's.
Yeah. Yeah.
St. Peter's.
Now, one of the other bells that he made, they was a bell for the, I think it was the third Chicago courthouse. And this was another large, huge bell. That bell hung in the courthouse, which is basically where the Cook County building is now. That's where the old courthouse was. And that bell rang for Abraham Lincoln's funeral cortege. When his body arrived in Chicago, they transported it, on wagon, I believe, with a large funeral or procession of mourners and dignitaries, and it actually laid in state in the courthouse. And that bell was ringing for President Lincoln, doing a toll for President Lincoln. And they said that, at that time, you gotta imagine Chicago wasn't as large as it is now, but they said that you could hear that bell all throughout Chicago. It was also used to, warning for fires and, for fire alarms. So, it's, and again, he became quite wealthy. In 1849, the city directory listed Rinker Brass Foundry at 209 West Randolph, and 181 West Washington was his house. In 1849, also, tragedy hits H.W. Rinker. His wife and his son die in a cholera epidemic. You can imagine the tragedy, getting hit with, your wife and one of your children dying. Well, in 1851, H.W. Rinker marries my great-grandmother's sister. That's how he becomes my third great uncle. Up until that point, he wasn't related to me, but in 1851, he joins our family.
Did he ever become a minister?
Hang on.
Okay.
Hang on to your horse.
Running here.
In 1853 or 1854 is when he cast the bell for the Chicago courthouse. I kind of got into that a little early. Then in 1856, this is after he had remarried into our family, and I believe Matilda was one of the children that he had with, with my great-great aunt, dies. So now this is a wife and 2 kids have died. Rinker says, you know what? This is a sign from God. I came here to be a minister, and I'm making money hand over fist making bells, which I never wanted to do. And he's like, I'm quitting. He sells the business, moves to Fort Wayne, Indiana, joins a seminary there, and in 1858 he's ordained as a Lutheran minister and installed at a church in Terre Haute, Indiana. So yes, he did become a minister.
I listen. What happened to?
Yeah, in Terre Haute, Indiana.
Yeah.
So, he was, again, quite a character, one of the article that I found about him referred to him, because at a time, especially during that era, you still had Native American conflict in the area. You had outlaws, you had ruffians, and he was what they called a circuit rider minister. He didn't have his own church for a while, so he would go visit different communities, including Schaumburg, and preach at churches and, you know, and whatnot. And one of the articles I saw referred to him as a preacher with a Bible and a gun.
Oh.
So he was definitely a character. One of the other things that he did settle in central Illinois, established a farm there and a church, and that's where he was when he passed. But one of the crazy ironies, you know, he left Germany because he didn't want to make bells. Well, he's become a minister, but he still keeps a side business of making bells for churches, and has a foundry builds a foundry on his farm in central Illinois, and makes bells until he dies. So, you know, I always think of that Godfather movie, you know, where just when I think I'm out, they pull me back in.
Right.
But with the bell business. But he passed away in 1889. And I'll tell you some of the, get into some of the impact of why I talk about H.W. Rinker. Well, we were talking about that courthouse bell. This is the bell that was destroyed by the Great Chicago Fire. And you can see how big it was. That's a guy standing in the middle of it.
Wow.
Was that the bell?
That is the bell that was the courthouse bell. This is after it fell and was destroyed.
Oh my gosh.
But
That
you
was
can
big.
still see the circumference of the bottom part of the bell. I mean, that is, you know, I mean, that guy could probably be laying down, and it would still be
Yeah.
wider than him. So this actually is a picture that's in the possession of the Chicago Historical Society.
Do they have any part left of that bell, or they destroyed it?
Yes.
Must be an heirloom.
Well, I don't have any of these. But the Chicago History Museum in the Chicago Fire exhibit does have a chunk about like that
Wow.
of the original bell. But they also have these things in their collection. The helmet there is actually part of this other case, and there's also brass coins in there.
Huh.
Those were all cast from the remnants of the original bell that was destroyed in the fire, and were sold as souvenirs to raise funds for fire
Must be
equipment for the fire
worth a
department.
penny, pretty penny.
Yeah, yeah. And that bell over here on the right is actually a hand bell. And you didn't hear it here, but I actually got to see that bell in person, and the museum curator actually rang it for me,
Wow.
so I could hear my great uncles
Wow.
and handiwork. But yeah, that's yes, if there were souvenirs of it or leftovers, they made souvenirs, and they've got
Wow.
a chunk of it at the museum.
Awesome.
All right, next guy that we're going to talk about is Wilhelm Kolb. He was born in Germany. He also wanted to become a pastor, but he, with the blessings of his family, studied to become a pastor with his local minister. He, you know, studied scripture and theology and everything with this pastor. He learned Latin, Greek, Hebrew, and English, as well as his native German. And this is all before he left Germany, under the tutelage of this pastor of his. 1851, at the age of 24, he arrives in America and goes to the Fort Wayne Seminary, which I mentioned. H.W. Rinker went to the Fort Wayne Seminary. Rinker went after Wilhelm did, and after they were already brother-in-laws.
Oh.
So my speculation is that Wilhelm influenced H.W. Into attending the same seminary as where he had attended. And then in 1852, he preached his first sermon on Pentecost Sunday in Iowa. So he goes from Germany, Indiana, to Iowa. And, there we go. In 1853, he marries the sister of H.W. Rinker's wife. Actually, I think they married first. In 1854, he ends up in Sheboygan, Wisconsin as a minister, and was there for 14 years preaching at a church in Sheboygan, Wisconsin. In 1868, he decides to retire from the ministry, and he purchases 60 acres of land from his brother-in-law, H.W. Rinker, including this property here.
This one?
Yes.
That we're standing?
That was part of that 60 acres of land
Wow.
Wow.
that he purchased. And over the next couple of years, he bought more land, 20 acres and 15 acres, from H.W. Rinker as he was making more money in farming. And H.W. Rinker had no use for the property at that time because he'd already given up the business and the farm and moved to Central Illinois preaching. So I imagine he may have gotten some deals and, hey, I'm your brother-in-law, versus some other Joe Schmo.
So
I don't
they-
have the details of the purchase prices or whatnot, or the bargain. But actually, in some of the documents that I found, I know I say Wilhelm Kolb purchases 20 and 15. Actually, in the things that I found, it was actually his wife bought the property, and probably that was using, hey, I'm your sister-in-law kind of thing.
Yeah.
So that's kind of interesting. Oh, did we miss something here? Oh, I forgot to, back when we were talking about Heinrich Rinker, he built his house when he married in the Gantz family, which is in our family. He built a house on Milwaukee and Nagel. And the property, again, including this property that he sold to Wilhelm Kolb, he actually purchased from the Native Americans, including Victoria Pothwary's reservation, which ran from here all the way to Caldwell. And, so he was making money hand over fist. Now, the sad thing, that's a picture of his house. They called it a Gothic revival construction, as far as the house goes. And, which was kind of unique for the area. And it became this is after H.W. Rinker's gone, it became the last example of a Gothic revival house in the Chicago area.
Wow.
And about the 1970s, 1980s, the owner of the house decides, again, this is at Milwaukee and Nagel, Prime Real Estate says, you know what? I want another shopping center here. And applies to, have it torn down and build a shopping center. An alderman named Roman Paczynski, I don't know if you guys have heard of Roman Paczynski, said, hang on.
Too young for that? I don't know.
You're too young.
He was a very powerful alderman at the time. His daughter Aurelia became county clerk.
Oh, yeah. And he was around a long time. He was in office.
For a long time.
Yes,
he was.
But he's like, hang on, we got enough shopping centers. We don't have as many, Gothic revival houses. He's like, I'm gonna work and get that declared a historic
landmark.
building. And he did, he was successful. If you go to the Chicago Library, they actually have a pamphlet on this house with a biography of H.W. Rinker. And this picture itself, I found in the collection for the Art Institute of Chicago. So it was a historic house. How many of you guys have heard of Chicago politics?
Oh, yes.
Well, the builder or the owner of the property didn't like the fact that it was declared a historic landmark. And mysteriously, it suffered from an arson fire.
Oh.
Accidentally, yeah.
Yeah, mysteriously. Well, it didn't destroy it, it damaged it. So, you know, the builder was disappointed that it didn't get destroyed in the arson fire. Well, then, gosh, somebody made a mistake and gave this demolition company the wrong address of a house that needed to be destroyed. And one Saturday morning, the house was destroyed by this demolition company.
Oh my gosh.
And so that's why you don't see this house at Nagel in Milwaukee, and you see a shopping center there.
Oh, really?
And Super Dog.
Yes,
Oh.
that's where the super dog.
Yeah.
is.
Tore it down and
It's right
put down a
across from
Super Dog.
It was right across from the
Yeah.
super dog.
Uh-huh.
But that just gives you an idea, you know, again, I always call it Chicago politics, you know, or the Chicago way.
That's like Meg's Field.
Yeah, yeah. So that's the Rinker house, and again, this is how,
What a shame.
again, because he had the house there, he was buying land because he had money, you know, more money than, you know, a lot of people at that time. All right, let's go back to, he bought the properties. In 1883, and again, this has a bearing on this property. In 1883, Willem Kolb's two sons, Theodore and J. Martin Kolb, get married in a joint wedding ceremony right at the house that is next door, would have been next door where the factory is now. Because the two brothers decide that they're going to continue farming, and actually, they were the ones that did most of the farming, even when Wilhelm retired. They came to this area first and set up a house or a cabin for the rest of the family, and then Mom and Dad and the other kids came out. So, you know, J. Martin and Theodore were the workers of the farm.
So that the next building was also a farmhouse?
Yes, the next door was actually where Wilhelm Kolb's house was. And after the marriage of the two sons, Theodore, the oldest, took over the house.
Oh,
Of course, Mom and Dad are, you know, not gonna get kicked out in the cold, but he takes over. And a second house is built here on this property for J. Martin Kolb and his wife.
Wow.
And J. Martin Kolb happens to be my great-grandfather.
Wow.
And Tilly Berlin Kolb is my great-grandmother. So they build a second farmhouse here, side by side. They basically worked the land for over 50 years, side by side. 1933, they both, couples survived and had their 50th wedding anniversary party in the house next door.
Wow.
So, you know, you can imagine that, you know, that's quite an accomplishment for both couples to have their 50th wedding anniversary. You know, again, living here and there. In 1900, I mentioned that that the village of Niles was formed in 1899. I always thought that Theodore Kolb, the oldest son, was a part of that formation of the village. I haven't found proof of it. Everything mentions other people other than Wilhelm, but in the 1900 village board meeting, which is at the museum. Theodore Kolb is listed there as a village trustee in 1900, and also later served as a village treasurer for over 30 years.
Wow.
So, 1905, Willem Kolb passes away. Again, like I said, 12 years after, the son takes over the farm and the house. Also that same year, Theodore Kolb's son starts a newspaper called the Norwood Park Sentinel. Kind of gives you an idea that, these are ingenious people. Also in 1906, Theodore Kolb, the grandson of Wilhelm, passes the bar exam, becomes the village attorney for Niles, Park Ridge, Wheeling, and several other villages.
Wow.
So he served as the village attorney for Niles for quite a few years. And again, growing up in the building next door here. 1923, Anna Kolb passes away. It's Willem Kolb's wife. And the family sells 75 acres of the farmland for $134,000 back in 1923 and splits it between the four Kolb brothers. I took a calculator and I'm like, okay, how much is $134,1923 today?
All right.
And it's over $2 million.
Wow. Oh my gosh. Wow.
So the and the funny thing is, I found an article that mentions this, but it doesn't mention the sisters. So I don't know if it was split evenly between the family. The article just mentions it was split between the brothers. So I mentioned that the brothers celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary. 1937, J. Martin Kolb passes away. 1943, Theodore Kolb passes away. 1955, like I said, they sold the 75 acres. At one time, the farm was 115 acres on both sides of Milwaukee Avenue. And so when they sold that 75, when Anna passed away, J. Martin and Theodore Kolb continued to farm a smaller section. They had the farm stand in front selling flowers and whatnot. So in 1955, this guy named Bud Slingerland had a drum factory in Chicago, and he was seeking, looking for a recreational site for his family. For his factory employees. So he approached the family and bought the remaining farmland in 1955 for his employees. At some point, I believe it was in the 20s, it may have been in 1923 when this chunk of land was sold. There was also a chunk of land that was sold to St. Adalbert's Cemetery. And I believe the southern portion of the St. Adalbert Cemetery is what used to be Kolb farmland. I think where George Hallis's body is, or mausoleum is. One of my cousins, I was talking with him about the family history, and he recalled visiting the farmhouse here on this property and the farmhouse next door, and he could describe it in vivid detail. But he told me that his father told him a story that his father at the time was a bank teller, and the family had him come over, I believe, to the house here, and there were bags of coins on the table. Well, that was part of the money from St. Adalbert's buying some of the property. And I believe, he was, again, he counted up the coins. It wasn't the full purchase price. Some of it was, bills and everything like that, but it was a large amount of coins. And I tend to believe that, those coins were probably like special offerings from different churches that were, part of St. Adalbert's, that, let's have a special offering, and, the workers, the families are putting in their coins into that offering for the purchase of the property. Maybe it's romantic, but I'd like to think of that. But anyway, we sell the property to Bud Slingerland. In 1958, the original farmhouse, which was the one next door, was burned down by the Niles Fire Department to make way for a Slingerland drum factory, which ended the Kolb family connection to this area. And this is, again, a Slingerland drum that was made in the factory right next door. So, one of the interesting things I found in, I think this book, there was a mention of the burning down, and that there was pictures of it in the newspaper. And I went through the archives that we have at the museum. We have these huge books of old Niles newspapers.
Wow.
And I was looking, at the ones from the date there, couldn't find anything. Went back a few months, about 6 months, and that's where I found it. Apparently the book had the wrong date in it.
Oh, jeez.
So, and just for kicks and grins, I'm gonna show you. Here's the farmhouse that was next door. That was the one that built by my great-great-grandfather. There's another picture of it. And this is them burning down the house.
They played music?
Slingerland Drum Company had a 4-piece jazz band entertaining the firefighters and the crowds that came to watch the house be burned. You can see the house in the background, firefighters over to the left spraying the water on the house, and the jazz band playing the music.
Oh my gosh.
And that's why it made the newspapers.
Oh my goodness.
I like the headline. This combo's real hot.
Right?
Well, I'd like to think that if this were to happen today, they might be playing the Talking Heads, burning down the house.
Yeah, burning.
So, excuse me.
It's like they're having fun outside.
I know, this is the first time I am seeing like something, celebration of destruction.
Yeah.
It looks
Well,
like
and,
celebration.
Slingerland drum, if you notice in the one man
that's
is
a
playing drums,
fire?
they're from
Mhm.
Slingerland.
Correct. Interesting.
I just wanted to share that with you. All right, the latest gentleman I was going to talk about is Heinrich Thoms, or some people call him Henry Thoms. He was born in 1824. I'm not 100% sure when he came here, because I found something that showed him arriving in 1843, but I also found German marriage records and the birth records of 2 of his children in Germany after that date. So maybe, I have heard, I watch some different genealogy shows. I have heard of people coming over and going back. So that's possible. Or it may be another Heinrich Thoms from the same area coming over in 1843. But what I can say for certain is in 1858, his daughter Wilhelmina Thoms was born here in Niles on the property. Actually, I'll show it later. The Thoms farmhouse was actually over on the other side of the Bunker Hill Forest Preserve right now. It's one of the shelter houses is actually built on it. His son was also born in 1862 right here in Niles. And the reason his son is important, Heinrich passed away in 1892. In 1899, when Niles was incorporated, Henry Thoms was part of the committee that petitioned the state for the formation of the village of Niles. He was also selected to the first board of trustees, and he served as a trustee. And I've also found in the village minutes him signing things as the village clerk, until his death in 1922. At that point, Louise Thoms, his widow, sells the family farm and buys a house in Park Ridge where the rest of the family would remain until they all moved out of the house. So, that's Heinrich. This is a map of the, an early map of the area. You can see, it talks about Victoria Pothier's reservation in the green here. This is Miranda's reservation up here. And then down here would have been Billy Caldwell's reservation. Now, in case you didn't know it, with a name like Thoms, your name is often misspelled. This is H. Thoms showing his section of the property. And then here's Wilhelm Kolb's section of property. Again, this is Milwaukee Avenue, and I believe this is Caldwell. Now, this kind of threw me for a bit of a loop at the beginning, because I'm like, well, Henry Thomas's property was on this side of the river, Wilhelm's, but in actuality, they could have, gone over there. Henry Thomas's has a little bit over on this side of the river, but his house was over here. So, and again, where we are right now is right here. Yeah, and here's the William Kolb property on the other side of Milwaukee, just south of St. Annebert's. So.
Interesting.
And let's see. This is a blow up of this map here that we've got here framed. And it's kind of deceiving. It's actually reversed a little bit, because this is west. There's St. Annebert's, where the gate used to be. Here's Martin Kolb, Theodore Kolb Farm. And again, this is a 1912, 1914 version of the map. And then here's the listing of Henry Thomas's farm. So that's the Thoms farm, the Kolb's farm. And as you look at this, just, again, north of the Kolb farms, you have a tavern, stoneyard, tavern, ice cream parlor, tavern, an inn. So, what I was talking about with people coming up to St. Annebert's and seeing a lot of taverns, that map kind of holds true to that being the case.
Interesting.
Which of the houses? And this is actually in the Historical Society Museum. It's a 1928 cornerstone to the Village Hall. And if you notice on the bottom, Theodore Kolb is listed as treasurer. So, as they say, some facts are set in stone. Can't get more,
Say it.
yeah. Now, this is an interesting story. I wanted to kind of end on a lighter note. You may think, wait, a lighter note? My great-great-uncle Theodore Kolb, who was the village treasurer, was almost shot and killed in a robbery of the bank. It was the Niles State Bank, and it was, I believe, 1931 or 1932. If you think of the gangster era, with all the, the gangsters going on and everything like that, he had just deposited money in the bank for the village of Niles, and had gone over to the speak with the the bank president. Okay? When two gentlemen, and I use the term loosely, two men, burst into the bank, one with a pistol, one with a shotgun, told everybody, put your hands up, freeze. Well, my great uncle reaches for his coat, like a lot of gentlemen those days wore an overcoat, and starts reaching into his coat. Well, the bank robbers think he's reaching for a gun, because what else would you be reaching for, in your coat like that? And so they draw down on him. The bank president jumps in front of him and says, no, wait. And what does my Uncle Theodore pull out? His ear horn. He couldn't hear the robbers telling him, hold, freeze, hold it. He reached into his pocket to pull out his ear horn and go, what'd you say?
So that was his original picture?
This is out of the Daily Times newspaper.
Wow.
It's a recount of the bank robbery, and that's a picture of Theodore Kolb with his ear horn that he was reaching into his coat for.
Wow.
See, it says
He's got
there,
more.
whose deaf nearly lost his life when he failed to hear bandits command.
That's the first hearing aid.
That's the first hearing aid.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah, you didn't have electronic hearing aids back then. You had the ear horn and go,
There is no way to lose that.
No. Or swallow it, or eat it. Have your dog eat it.
Yeah, but who has the pockets?
Correct.
Well, and the other side is, please try not to sleep with that one in your ear.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
It could cause problems. So, but I just thought I'd tell you that story.
That is.
Here's an example. I mentioned that the family had a flower stand. This actually is one of Theodore Kolb's sons. For the 4th of July, turned the flower stand into a fireworks stand, selling fireworks to residents of the city of Chicago. Again, this is 1936 when this picture was taken.
Wow.
And again, this would have been right out in front of here.
Here?
Wow.
Well, I think in front of the factory
The next
side of it, because that would have been his father's property.
Wow.
But I mean, it's almost right here in front, And then this is an aerial picture of the Slinger Lane Drum Company, the building next door, which, again, Theodore Kolb and Wilhelm Kolb's home was there. That's an example of a drum in front of the factory.
Yeah, look at the drum.
Does that still look same?
Yeah.
Well, it's no longer a drum company.
No, the building.
Yeah, the building is still there. That's a building supply at one point. And
Are they still in business?
I
Right now?
have no idea. I knew that there was
Costco?
a care center, baby center, something there.
Mm.
But after COVID hit, I think they stopped it, so I'm not sure what's in there now.
Okay.
The sign is
The sign is still
still
there.
there, yeah.
Yeah.
Some
So-
of it, anyway.
And Barb, you and I were talking earlier about this drum here.
Right.
The Michigan State Spartan Band performs with Slingerland drums,
Wow.
like this one here. And you can see the address, Milwaukee Avenue, Niles.
Well, that's next door, yeah.
Right. Here's again another series of the jazz drums, showing the address next door. And that's the end of my presentation.
Well,
Do
thanks.
you have any questions?
Thank you.
Have you been here before all this was formed?
No, my
No.
aunt didn't join the family until
52.
52.
In 52, I married Mark's uncle.
Gotcha.
But she is responsible for me being in existence.
Oh.
I tell everybody that. When my uncle and her got married, and this is on my mother's side, all of these folks are on my father's side.
Father's side. Oh.
When my uncle married her, they were living in Dayton, and he got a job with TWA. I don't know if you guys remember Trans World Airlines. I'll get you 1 second.
In the early 70s, I had Mina Cole. She was the organist and choir director of the Niagara, or no, the you've heard of the little country church in the city?
Yeah.
Well, she was the organist and choir there.
Which is interesting because while Martin and Theodore Colt's families were farmers and whatnot, their brothers Paul and Adamar, their families became ministers and teachers, and Adamar's son was the choir director and organist at St. Peter's Lutheran Church in Arlington Heights. And there's a whole history of ministers and choir directors in the Colts. So she's probably related.
She was.
But I was mentioning when my Aunt Helga married my Uncle Donald, and he got an offer for TWA, they had a choice of where to live, the Chicago area or go down to Florida. And she, like a lunatic, decided that instead of the sunny beaches of Florida, to go to snowy northwest Chicago.
No, she's not gonna regret it. She is keeping all the tsunamis and whatever it is correct. Hurricanes
Yeah.
and tsunami and tornadoes. They're safe here.
But the reasoning was that one of my other uncles was working in the steel plants in Gary, Indiana, and it would be closer to family. Well, as my Uncle Donald was working with TWA, he runs into a guy named Roger Thoms, one of the Thomeses, and says, "Hey, Roger, you want to meet my kid's sister?" And that's how I came around.
It's all because I did not want to go to Florida.
Florida.
I wanted to come to Chicago.
So,
It's so, I'm the reason why he and his two brothers are here.
Oh.
but any other questions or comments?
I remember seeing the band place out here. I'd be riding my bike by, and it's
Oh yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Also, the Chicago fire, they had Wisconsin, I guess, had a bigger fire at the same time.
Oh yeah. Yes.
But Chicago was people, so they talked. There's more stuff going on than just a huge. There was a bigger
Yeah.
fire there.
Yeah. A lot of property was destroyed up there. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Being a bit of a history nut, I've seen that.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
How long has White Eagle been here?
Oh, gosh.
I'm not exactly sure. I'd have to.
White Eagle. That's been here for a while.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
I remember it being here when we went to Tanta's house, you know. Oh, yeah, in the 50s.
Yeah,
that's
been
Oh,
here
at
for a
least
long
50s,
time.
yeah.
And any history, you know, like when this building was built, or what was it before, like?
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure what happened between Martin Kolb's aunt passing and the selling of the house and when this building was built. I'd have to do some more digging and more research.
We would love to hear it sometimes if you can.
Yeah.
Sure.
Same
It
thing,
will be interesting to know more.
Yeah.
same thing with Superdog. I'll bet you that's been here for ages too, as long
yeah.
as you say
Oh, yeah.
Kaczynski and look at his
Right.
daughter.
Mhm.
They didn't want the shopping center there?
Yeah,
So,
it was,
yeah,
it
they
was
built
more,
that all the way down.
more across from where
Walgreens,
Superdog was.
Yeah, that's been here for ages.
Mhm.
Okay, well, thank you, everybody.
Well,
Thank
thank
you.
you.
Thank you so
That
much.
was,
I've got a couple of books up here, like I said, Barb and
That's
the
been
Niles
great.
Historical Society has,
Yeah, we have a
Donated
copy
2
of that
books.
map, if you wanna look at it. I do need to bring it back.
no,
yeah,
no, I'll take a
But,
picture if you don't mind.
but
It's
there's,
kind of faint.
they've donated 2 of the books to the Holmes, library. This one book here, is written by our former president.
Yes. Tom Ferraro.
Yeah.
He's also, like Mark, local historian.
Yeah, and
It's
they-
the early parts of Niles, kind of like the period that you covered.
Yeah, I believe he's working on a new book.
Yes.
And is this the copy or the original of they made it?
My understanding, this is a copy, because if you look, it was redrawn, I believe traced,
Thankfully.
yeah, I believe it was traced off the original.
Oh, okay.
You know, like laid on top of the original.
And then traced it out,
Yeah.
okay. Do you guys still have the original or?
That I'm not sure.
I think we do. It's very fragile and it's actually larger.
Okay.
And it's got some major wear and tear. So I think that's why they
They made
did
the
that.
copy.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Wow,
to be a little more durable.
Yeah.
that is super interesting.
And these, little things on the top here, they call these, badges. They're, part of the drum.
Oh.
You'll see it there. These are unused badges that were never done, but
And they are original?
Yeah, they get a serial number.
Right, they would have the
Wow.
serial number, but the important thing is it shows, you know, made in Niles, Illinois,
Mhm.
so.
Very nice. Well, thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. Anyone else, any comments, anything you guys wanna ask? I really appreciate your time coming,
Well,
bringing.
Again, I appreciate you guys inviting me.
Yeah.
If you want to also to add that to your library.
Oh my God, this will be wonderful. I
It's
was
got
gonna
my
ask
notes
you
on
if you
it.
have the copy, if you can send me a link of this
Yeah, I'll send
live.
you a PowerPoint.
Is there a way we can post it on our social media page, or is there liabilities, is there any restrictions?
No.
Yeah, I'll send you a PowerPoint of the
That
presentation.
would be great,
Yeah.
if you can share
Please
with
do.
more people.
And I'll share, absolutely.
And I'm going to try, let me hit stop, see if it's still doing it.
I think it is.
Will be interesting